everyone, this is Dana. Today I want to show you how to add a garter ridge border to a blanket. As you can see, I've already knit my blanket here. This is my Mountain Brook baby blanket, and it's got a nice straight edge, but I wanted to add a navy border the whole way around it. The beauty of this Mountain Brook baby blanket pattern for me is just that it looks the same on both sides, so it's not like I have a front or a back to worry about. This blanket was knit on a 3/4 inch gauge infinity loom. Again, the gauge is the distance from the center of one peg to the center of the next, so this is 3/4 of an inch, so it's a 3/4 inch gauge loom. When you're doing your border, I would suggest that you use the same gauge. Doesn't have to be that loom. I'm going to use a 3/4 inch gauge round loom just because it's easier to handle. And you should also probably use the same weight yarn. I did not buy the right yarn whenever I went back to get a border color. So I knit it with a bulky, but I'm going to do my border with a super bulky and it'll be fine. Alright, let me get the camera set up, zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Before I do that though, just let me explain. We're going to do a garter ridge. So if you remember, a garter ridge is one row of knit, one row of purls. A row of knits, a row of purls. So you're just alternating your rows. And then we are going to do mitered corners so that it's a nice looking corner. And I'll show you that. So let me get the camera set up so you can see in a little closer what we're doing, and we'll get started. Alright, I like to start my border not on the edge, not on the very corner edge, because I'm going to miter a corner there, and then I'll join my beginning with my end somewhere over here. We'll make it as invisible as possible, but it's just easier than trying to do it on a corner, I think. So what we'll do, I'm left-handed, guys, sorry about that, but I always work from left to right when I start. Just kind of makes my life easier. This technique will work the same whether you're going right to left or left to right. When I look at the edge that is already on my blanket, let's see if you can see this here. So when the edge is already on my blanket, it's a nice edge and it's got 2 strands per stitch on that edge. I like to lift up both of those strands and attach my border to 2 strands. Some folks will use just the bottom strand, some will just use the top strand. What I have found when you use just the bottom strand or just the top strand is you get your border attaches to the one side, and then you end up with kind of a line between your blanket and your border because of that stitch that had not been picked up. I am going to work from left to right on my loom because I'm left-handed. This technique works the same if you're working right to left, just flip everything over. But I'm working from left to right. I'm going to pick up a stitch, I don't want to do on the edge. I'm going to do a pretty mitered corner there and then come in a little bit and then join my starting edge with my ending edge. So I'm going to start over a little bit. I'm going to pick up both the bottom and the top loop and put it on peg number 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's peg number 6. Those 2 go right there. Okay. So I've got my stitch on peg number 6. I'm going to do a double E-wrap cast on to get my 6 pegs cast on. Put a slip knot on peg number 1. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and my 6th peg has that one. So I put a slip knot on peg 1, and then I'm going to double E-wrap cast on these 4 empty pegs, and we'll just knit off that last peg. So double E-wrap cast on, I can almost say that fast. You E-wrap the peg 1 time, you E-wrap it a 2nd time, and you lift the bottom loop off over the top loop. And just snug it up a little bit. I wouldn't go crazy tight snug because it makes it too hard to lift that loop off when we get back to it coming the other direction. Double E-wrap, lift the bottom loop over the top, snug it just a little. Double E-wrap, lift the bottom loop over the top loop and snug just a little. Double E-wrap, lift the bottom up over the top, snug just a little. Now for the last one, we are just going to flat knit it or U-knit. Okay. Again, our border is going to be a garter ridge border. That means we alternate one row of E-wrap knits, one row of purls, one row of E-wrap knits, one row of purls. So my first row is going to be E-wrap knits. I'm going to skip or slip the first peg, and we're going to E-wrap 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's E-wrap and knit those guys off. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then our final peg, we are going to flat knit or U-knit stitch that final peg, because that's the stitch that's going to give us a real pretty edge. So I'm going to U-knit the last peg. Okay, so that was my row, my first row of E-wrap knits. Now we're going to purl back. Again, to keep a nice pretty edge, I'm going to slip or skip this first peg. So we will start our purls on peg number 2. So we're going to purl that peg. And see, these are a little snug because that was my double E-wrap cast on. That's why you don't want to make that too tight. 2, 3, and 4. Now when I get down to my very last peg, every time I'm on a purl row coming back and I get to my last peg, I need to pick up the very next stitch. So here is the first stitch. Let me make sure you can see that. So this was the first stitch I had put on the peg, and you can see the first stitch, and here's my contrasting blue yarn. So here's my next stitch, and I'm going to take both the front and the back, 2 stitches, or 2 strands that were on that stitch, and those 2, I'm holding them with my finger right now, but I'm going to lift this loop off and place those 2 loops on peg number 6 and place that back on top. Okay, and now we're going to treat all of these loops here as one. So again, every time I come to peg 6, the only thing I ever do to peg number 6 is U-knit or flat knit it. So I'm going to knit all of those bottom loops, my gray ones and my blue ones, up over that. And if it's easier for you, you can always just lift the strands off one at a time instead of lifting them off as a group. Okay? That's it. Now we're going to just repeat our garter ridge pattern again. We're going to slip or skip the first one. We're going to E-wrap down here to the end. E-wrap to the next to the last peg, because that peg we're not going to E-wrap. Knit these off. And then this outer edge here, we always just U-knit or flat knit. So that's one thing to just remember. Our 2 outer edge pegs, always U-knit those, always flat knit those, whatever you want to call it, a U-knit or a flat knit, doesn't matter. Okay? So now we're going to come back and purl. Again, we skip that peg. Purl it. Oops, missed. There we go. Purl it. Purl it. And as I get to my last stitch on the purl row, again, we're going to pick up the 2 strands from this next loop, grab a hold of them with my fingers. I'm going to pick up the loop that is presently on that peg, put my next loop from the blanket on, put my border back on top, and since it's the last peg, we U-knit or flat knit. And again, what I was saying earlier is you can do one at a time if that makes it easier. Oops, and then I just split my yarn. And split it some more. For the heaven's sakes. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you a little shortcut for making a garter ridge. For me, it just makes it go faster. You guys are welcome to do your row of E-wraps and then your row of purls, your row of E-wraps and purls. But the shortcut is this. So in our pattern, we know we're going to slip or skip this peg, and we know that the last peg is always going to be a unit or a flat knit stitch. So I am going to go ahead and wrap my 1, 2, 3, 4 pegs that I know are E-wrap. 2, 3, 4, and I know this last peg is a unit, so I'm going to wrap it. Okay, I know that coming back this peg is going to be skipped, so I'm going to go ahead and knit this guy off. The beauty of this garter ridge stitch is you wrap it and then you work all of the stitches as you go back the other direction. So I'll be working these 2 stitches each time I come to the peg. I'm working the 2 rows, I guess, actually, my row of E-wraps, and then I'm going to purl as I come back. So I know I skipped this one, so I got to work off my lower loop for the E-wrap row, and now I can do the purl row. Okay, work off the lower loop for the E-wrap row, and now I purl that same peg. Work off the lower loop for the E-wrap row, and then purl that row, or that stitch, sorry. Work off the loop for the E-wrap row, and purl that stitch. So I'm purling on my way back, come to my last loop, and what do I do, folks? I grab my next stitch, both strands of the next stitch, pick this loop up, hold it in my hand, put those 2 strands on, put my border back on, and I just flat knit all of those loops off. Okay, so let's do the shortcut one more time. Again, I know I skip or slip this first peg. We E-wrap 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to unit or flat wrap that one. Okay, I haven't worked them off yet. I've just set up the loom, so to speak, for my E-wrap row. Now I'm going to work back. Now I know that for my purl row, going the opposite direction, I skipped this one, so I'm going to go to this peg number 2. I still have the loop for my E-wrap row that I have not lifted off, so I'm going to lift that off right now. And purl the same peg, because this is my purl row. Lift off the loop from the E-wrap row, and purl for the purl row. Lift off the bottom loop for the E-wrap row, purl for the purl row. Lift off the loop for the E-wrap row, and purl for the purl row. Okay, I'm back to my last peg on the purl row. What do? We have to pick up another stitch from the blanket, hold on to it, lift this loop off, put my blanket stitch on peg 6, put my border on top of it, and it's the last peg, so I flatten it or unit all of these off as though they were one. Yeah, that didn't work either. There we go. Okay. So that's the garter ridge shortcut. I am going to knit along and then I'll come back and show you my progress and we'll start talking about corners. Alright, we've worked our straight edge along and now we're coming down to the last stitch in my straight edge. So I'm going along. We're going to finish the purls. And now I've come to the last stitch on that edge. I'm going to pick up the 2 pieces of that very last stitch, put it on the last peg, put my trim color back over, and we're going to unit that off. And now we start our mitered corner. Mitered corner is going to be some short rows in each direction. So the first step is we're going to E-wrap back, like we've been doing. E-wrap and knit off, E-wrap, knit off, E-wrap, knit off, and E-wrap, knit off. Now we're going to purl back, but that last stitch, keep it in mind right now. We're going to purl back to the last stitch, and rather than knitting that last stitch or doing anything with it, we are just going to pick it up and wrap and turn around that peg. We're coming down, purl. Now this last stitch, we're just going to pick it up, wrap and turn. Put the yarn to the inside of the loom and back out and peg and wrap, and we're not going to do anything with that loop. We're just going to let that wrap sit on there. We'll deal with the 2 stitches later. So our next row going back is we're going to knit going back, leaving that first peg with the 2 loops on it. Okay, we're going to skip or slip that first one, and we're going to purl coming back. We're going to stop just before the last peg, because we're decreasing the number of pegs. So this peg here, we're going to pick it up, and we're just going to wrap and turn on that peg. Okay, now we E-wrap back. So as we're E-wrapping one direction, purling the other direction, each time we do it, we're going to decrease the number of pegs by 1 and just leave the wraps sitting on it. So right now I have wraps sitting on 2 pegs on the right hand side of my loom. All right, we're going to purl back now, skipping peg 1, purl 2, purl that peg, and now we have to wrap and turn on this peg. Okay, we've wrapped and turned on this peg, and we're going to E-wrap back. Okay, so we E-wrap back, and now I'm just going to purl. Let me take off the E-wrap loops there. Now we're going to purl. And this peg is going to be a wrap and turn peg. One E-wrap, and I flatten it there on my last stitch to keep the border edge pretty. And now I'm not going to do anything other than wrap and turn this peg. And I'm going to go back and E-wrap this one. Actually, I'll flatten it. Okay. Now we start increasing. So we'll skip the first peg and we'll purl, purling both loops off as one. And that's one peg, and now we go back the opposite direction. We'll flatten it, that peg. And now I'm going to purl 2. So there's purl 1, possibly. There we go, purl 1 and purl 2, again taking 2 loops off as one, and go back the opposite direction. Skip that peg, and we're going to E-wrap 1 and flatten it 1. Okay, and now we go back and we're going to purl 3. So we're gradually increasing 1 stitch each row. So purl 1, purl 2, and purl 3. Our third one is 2 loops off as one. And we're going to go back the opposite direction now. We skip that one and we E-wrap 2 and flatten it or U-knit 1. So there's E-wrap 1, E-wrap 2, and then the flatten it edge. And now going the opposite direction, we're going to purl 4. So purl 1, purl 2, purl 3, and again our fourth peg that we're purling, we're going to lift off both of those loops as though they were one. Okay,
We're going to go back the opposite direction and skip that peg, and we're going to E-wrap 3. So we're going to E-wrap 1, 2, 3, and we'll flatten it or unit that last peg. So there's our E-wraps. E-wrap 1, E-wrap 2, E-wrap 3, and we'll flatten it this last one for a pretty edge. And now we're going to purl back. So purl 1, purl 2, purl 3, purl 4. And we finished the miter corner, and so now we're going to continue on around with the next stitch from the blanket and place it back on the last peg. Take the top and bottom and place it back onto the loom. Put your trim back on top and back to just unit or flatten it, those 3 loops off as though they were one. Okay, and that's it for our mitered corner. We have now completed our mitered corner. So now we just continue going with our rows of E-wraps and always flatten it or unit the last peg. And then we'll go back the opposite direction with purls. So E-wrap, 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 knit those off. Now we're going to purl back and continue to pick up the next stitches until we get back to our next corner. Then you'll do another mitered corner. Once you've finished all your mitered corners, then you will come to the very starting cast on edge, and we'll discuss how to deal with that here in a minute. But for now, we're just going to continue to pick up the loops, put them on the last peg underneath the trim color, unit that off. Okay? A little hard to see there, but you've just created a beautiful mitered corner. Isn't that pretty? Love how that looks. All right. And now we've gone ahead and finished our trim back to the stitch. There's my beginning stitches on the right hand side. So I'm down to my very last stitch. And this is the same stitch that we started with. I'm going to unit that off. Okay. Once I have done this, on my cast on edge there, I am going to take each of those stitches and I'm going to place them back on the loom on the respective pegs, but I'm going to purl those off. So I'm just going to do a purl stitch. But for now, I'm going to lay them back on the loom. Okay, this gets a little tricky. So now what I'm going to do is I want to be purling the top one. So I have to kind of lift it over the bottom loop just to get it down below it. And now I'm going to purl from the top to the bottom. You can, if you want, before you get to this point, take all of the loops off and then put your original cast on edge under all of them. I should have probably done that, but I didn't, so we're going to do it the hard way. Okay, next one, same kind of deal. The stitch that's on top is actually one I want to purl, so I have to pull it down below and then reach my hook from the top to the bottom and purl that stitch off. And put that stitch back on the peg. There we go. Again, the stitch on the top is the one I actually want to purl, so I need to move it to the bottom below the other stitch. There you go. So I'm going to separate my 2 stitches. It's driving me nuts. I should have done it the other way, but I didn't. So separate my 2 stitches, come down from the top, and purl that one off. Boy, I made a royal mess here, haven't I? see if I can show you. Okay, there's my 2 stitches. I'm going to move the top one down below the other one. And now I'm going to purl. And put that stitch back on. Okay, same kind of thing here. There's my top stitch. That's the one I want to purl, so I have to pull it kind of down below the other one. Purl it up again. It would have been so much easier if I had taken the loops off the loom, maybe used a scrap piece of yarn to take them off, put that cast on edge back on, and then put my final stitches on top of them. Saved me from this whole rigmarole of trying to make it work. Anyway, I'm down to my last stitch now. I have joined the cast on edge with the final stitches, and now I'm just going to go through and do a sewn bind off. So I'll take my working yarn, giving me about 12 inches worth of yarn to work with. Take a yarn needle, and I'm going to thread the yarn needle with that working yarn. Okay. And with this sewn bind off, all we do is we sew from the bottom of the loop up through the top. Go to the next peg, sew from the bottom of the loop up through to the top. And again, we just sew from the bottom to the top on every peg till we get to the very end. And once we have sewn from the bottom up through the top on all of the pegs, then we'll be able to just lift all of these loops off of the loom, tie off our working yarn to secure it, and weave in all of the ends, and we will be finished with our border. We'll lift all of these off of the loom. And you kind of have to work it a little bit just to get it to blend well. And it becomes pretty seamless, pretty hard to tell exactly where it is. And I just knot those together and weave the ends in, and you'll be able to see. How it joins together and looks pretty seamless. I mean, you can tell it's there, but it could be a whole lot worse. That's it. That's basically all there is to making a garter ridge edge on a blanket.